afternoon, depending on where you live, I guess. It's good morning for me. I'd like to welcome you to the Canada Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorder Research Network's webinar on mental health, suicidality, and FASD, research and intervention strategies. This is the second part of a two-part webinar series, and the timing is great because it was World Mental Health Day on Tuesday. I'd like to thank you all for joining us. I'm going to give a minute or two for people to join the webinar, but while we wait, it was recently Thanksgiving, so maybe put in the chat if you are willing to, where you're from and what you're grateful for this year. We'll just give a few more minutes for people to join the webinar. While we're waiting, I'll introduce myself. My name is Dorothy Reid. I'm the mom of 2 boys with FASD and the grandmother of 3 kids who were prenatally exposed to alcohol, one who has been diagnosed with FASD. I also am the proud great-grandmother of 4 young boys. My kids started very early. I'm also the co-chair of the Family Advisory Committee for CanFASD, and I'm really excited to be your host and grateful to be your host at the webinar this year, today. An important step in reconciliation is the acknowledgement of traditional territories and the recognition of the people that live in those territories. The CanFASD Research Network recognizes the historical significance and contribution of the Indigenous people and their cultures and understands the important role that Indigenous communities play in today and in the future. We acknowledge that we work, live, and meet on traditional territories across Canada, and many of the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit whose footsteps have marked these lands for centuries. I'm actually situated on the unceded territory of the Sumas and Matskwe people, who are part of the Stalo Nation, and I'm grateful to be able to live, laugh, love, and learn on these beautiful lands. I just want to start with a few housekeeping rules. We will be recording this presentation and it will be available on the CanFASD YouTube channel. And if you did miss the first webinar, that's also on the YouTube channel. This Zoom webinar has a question and answer function where participants can ask questions. And if you like the question somebody else has asked, you can upvote those questions so the most common ones arise to top. There will be time, about 15 minutes. Our presenters are planning at the end for them to answer any questions that you might have about the webinar. So please use the question and answer rather than the chat function to ask your questions. It's now my great honor to be able to introduce our fabulous presenters for today. Dr. Jacqueline Pai is a professor at the Department of Educational Psychology and assistant clinical professor in the Department of Pediatrics at the University of Alberta. Also, she is a practicing registered psychologist for the past 20 years. She began her career as a criminologist and forensic counselor working with incarcerated youth. Motivated by this experience, she returned to academia to study youth at risk, child development, and neuropsychology, leading to her current focus on interventions for individuals with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. Dr. Pai has over 75 peer-reviewed publications, but places the greatest value of the work on the various community and government agencies. To this end, Dr. Pai currently leads the Intervention Network Action Team for the Canada FASD Research Network, a role that facilitates the link between research, policy, and practice. Our second presenter is Emma Jewell. Emma is a research assistant with Psychology, Law, and Neurodevelopmental Policy and Research Group at the University of Guelph, as well as with the Canada FASD Research Network. She completed her undergraduate degree and thesis at the University of Guelph before her Master's of Social Work at Wilfrid Laurier University. Emma is passionate about conducting research that connects to practice, advocacy, and systemic change. She's passionate about working and researching in the context of the criminal legal system with an emphasis on mental health and disability. She also has experience working in restorative justice and supporting adults with justice involvement. In her free time, as if she has any, Emma enjoys cooking, going on walks, and spending time with family and friends. Now, without any more ado, I'm going to pass you on to Jackie and Emma. Thank you.
Wonderful. Dorothy, thank you for that kind introduction. It's really great to be here today. Nice to see all these folks. And I'm actually, I was sort of listening to Dorothy, but truly, to be honest, I was reading the chat and appreciating hearing about what folks are thankful for. It kind of put me in a good space here on this Friday morning for me morning. So yeah, my name is Jackie, and I'm joining you guys from the area of Edmonton, sort of outside of Edmonton area, which is Treaty 6 territory. And so I appreciate Dorothy's acknowledgement of how grateful we are to have the opportunity to live and learn and love on these beautiful lands. I actually really appreciated the way you said that, Dorothy. It was wonderful. And I certainly hold great gratitude for those in our community who have not only given us this beautiful space that we you know, the opportunity to be on this space and to think and work in concert. But I always like to just comment on how much I appreciate the relationships that have been created for me within Indigenous community by folks who are willing to teach me and be patient with me and help me learn and expand my understanding. And I just how I hold so much gratitude for that, because it's such a gift that I don't deserve in any way, and yet they've offered it. And I really feel that the work, even things that we're going to talk about today, everything has been permeated by the deep impact of these folks. So I will try to rein in my thoughts, my meandering thoughts, but I just, in listening to you, Dorothy, I had to just add that as something I'm just so deeply appreciative of and thankful for. Emma, I don't know if you want to say hi while we're saying hi.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm from Guelph, Ontario, specifically the Arawandran and Haudenosaunee lands in Guelph, part of the Haldimand Tract. I want to echo everything Jackie said. I can't put it as eloquently, so I'll leave it at that. But I really am grateful to be here with everyone today, and I'm looking forward to delving into this topic further.
I love that you called me eloquent there, Emma,
Oh,
because
yeah.
I was really quite meandering, but I've struggled with just actually expressing and not writing that down, because I like to think about it as I say it, but sometimes, especially on a Friday, my mind goes. So thanks to everyone for your patience in hearing us. So I am now going to share our screen and get our PowerPoint started, and you're going to let me know if I get the right one up and going here, Emma.
Mm-hmm.
How are we doing? We looking good?
Looks good to me.
That's what I want to hear. Wonderful. So today, as Dorothy indicated, we're kind of picking up on where the last webinar you may have attended or not. And I think I saw it go into the chat too. So folks are curious about the first webinar, take a look. But today, Emma and I are going to chat with you a little bit broadly again about FASD and mental health, because we want to create some context and a little bit of space for understanding. But we really also want the opportunity to say, okay, now what? And what do we do? And what's particularly exciting is that you know, Emma has led an initiative to put together a mental health toolkit that is recently out and available. And so we want to feature some of the elements of that toolkit, so that not only we're going to kind of try to connect the dots around understanding to action, but also hopefully leave in your hands the resources that you can work through, think through, and take forward with you as we continue to find our pathway towards health and wellness for ourselves and folks with FASD. So let's see if I can get my computer rolling here. Yeah, we'll try it this way. Try it this way. There we go. Emma and I have been having for anyone who didn't notice, this may be a lucky day for Dorothy Reid, but for me, Friday the 13th, maybe less so. And already we've had more technological issues. So we're both going, okay, it's not usually this hard. But anyway, so as I indicated today, we're going to talk a little bit about first just some highlight points and review to get to a shared space of understanding around mental health and FASD. Then we're going to link that a little bit of understanding and really sink our teeth into the response, the information that Emma has for us. And finally, we'll wrap up with just a few highlights of just overall considerations and reflections that we have to advance as we think about what it means to go forward as a community. So starting with mental health and FASD, we always like to start by saying, what do we mean when we say mental health? This is always a term that's used in a lot of different ways, depending on what we're intending. As Emma and I use it today, and we think about mental health, we're actually really wanting to think about a state of well-being. We're thinking about what it means to realize our abilities, cope with stress of life, work productively, and make a contribution to community. We will talk about mental disorders and disabilities. We will acknowledge that these are things that we need to respond to, provide treatment that's appropriate and address. But we want to think beyond disability or illness alone, and really think about mental health as not just, something to avoid poor mental health, but rather how do we advance towards actual health in terms of our wellness. And even healthy happiness. And that comes from the World Health Organization as we set that up, as you see. So starting with what we know about FASD and mental health, we know that mental health issues are overrepresented with individuals with FASD. Up to 90% of folks struggle with a mental health issue. That's distributed over lots of different kinds of mental health needs, including high rates of substance abuse. You saw that also on the preceding slide, but you see it here too in the second bar. Folks, if you were able to attend the prior webinar, or if you check the link out in the chat, you'll note that there's some information there also around suicidality. Also note that things like mood disorders or depression are really overrepresented. That bar, the further the bar, that blue bar goes to the right, the more we're seeing that represented in folks with FASD. The really pale bar represents folks that don't. So you see the difference, and that speaks to that overrepresentation. Anxiety at the bottom is also. We hear a lot often of talk about behavioral concerns and regulatory concerns that might present for folks with FASD, the things we see, the things that can sometimes literally jump off the page at us. What's striking about this as the research progresses is the amount of more internalizing or sometimes quiet mental health issues that we see present. And that is things like depression and anxiety that can really ride underneath a lot of the behavioral or other needs that present for folks with FASD. Come on, slide. There we go. Why do we see these high rates of mental health needs in folks with FASD? Lots of different reasons. And we've talked when we look in the research, we talk in the field, we recognize that there are influence of genetic factors, environmental or contextual factors, as well as brain-based differences that all come together to contribute some of the vulnerabilities or risk factors that can lead to a mental health need or illness even. But one of the things that Emma and I kind of want to focus on today is that when we recognize that there are lots of things that can contribute to risk, there's also lots of things that can contribute to wellness and be protective and can contribute to what makes us healthy. And so we're going to try to flip the storyline a little bit as we talk about it. And again, this isn't because we're trying to avoid areas of difficulty or not talk about it, but we want to recognize that everything is a two-sided coin. And just as something can be a risk because it makes us more vulnerable, vulnerable is actually much like susceptibility. And when I'm susceptible to influence, it may mean that I may be more greatly influenced, but that can go in both directions. So if environment can have a bigger influence on my mental health and wellness, then that can go both ways in terms of a risk or a protective factor. And so we want to grab onto the potential, the protective factors, while also looking at how we reduce those risks when we think about the complex picture that presents. This, dun, 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 that's my music for today on Friday, in case anyone wanted to hear it, is the toolkit that Emma has led us all in developing. And she is going to be dipping into this a little bit today as we talk about. So I can say all these things are great. Emma's going to actually put some teeth to it and say, well, what does that actually look like? And what does that mean? And hopefully whet your appetite to want to dig in more to the toolkit. So this is where we're going today. As we talk through this, we thought we'd break it into sort of 3 sections, just to think about mental health from 3 different lenses. And we're going to take a look at sort of individual components to mental health, relational components to mental health, and then societal. And this is not to be completely comprehensive. We're really just going to touch a little bit in each section because we want to set it up and we want to highlight the fact that we can think about this in lots of different ways and hold lots of different places around what it means to provide support or enhance mental health outcomes for folks with FASD. Am I on track? How we doing, Emma? If I missed anything?
You're great.
Keep going. See, I got to check in. We all get by with a little help from our friends. So notice I didn't sing that one. That was my favorite, everyone. So as we move into this, we're going to talk a little bit about understanding and responding. And we'll start with the individual level and then move our way through. And I'm going to provide just a little bit of sound bites around maybe some of the factors that might contribute to mental health needs. And then Emma's going to jump in and really let us know what that means in terms of what we're going to do about it. 2 big things I want to draw our attention to when we think about individual factors that contribute to mental health needs in individuals with FASD. One of them is we've got folks who have complex areas of difficulty in terms of brain-based functioning. These are all the domains that we look at when we assess and diagnose for FASD, and any number of these areas of functioning can be impacted, and in any case, we'll see at least 3 of them, probably more, impacted in folks with FASD. What that means is their brain-based differences are going to make it harder for them to intersect effectively in daily activities. So that could be a school setting, a work setting. Everything's going to be a little bit harder, a little bit more stressful. In addition, because we see such diversity in presentation, sometimes folks in those environments and our communities are not always going to understand that unique brain-based difference that exists for folks with FASD. So not only does the world always a little bit more difficult to make sense of, and it's harder to experience success in traditional ways, but folks may misinterpret me, my behavior, the way I'm working, the way I'm thinking. Combined, I start to experience more failure, I get more critical of myself, and I'm highly stressed. My effort invested doesn't always translate to the outcome that's desired. How frustrating is that? How anxious is that going to make me? Am I going to get hard on myself? What does that look like? These create context for vulnerability and places where how we create understanding and how we implement support could have a huge impact. But they definitely lay the groundwork for some of the factors that can contribute to mental health or mental illness. Another piece that we talk about often when we talk about brain-based differences for folks with FASD is a sensitive stress response system. This is a population that, due to the impact of alcohol in utero, may have a sensitized system so that when they do experience frustration or stress, like I referred to previously, they may be more attuned to feel frustration, extreme frustration, become reactive, or hypo-arouse and become more quiet and tune into themselves and disappear. So we're in a situation where we have brain-based differences that not only make the world a little bit more difficult to navigate, but then elevate my emotional sensitivity to that stress that's created or that difficulties that's created. And so these dual complexities come together. I mean, this is somebody who might be a bit more sensitized or sensitive to the impact of their difference within their communities. Good news, doesn't stop there. Take it away.
Thank you so much for providing that context. So now we're going to turn into some of the content of the Mental Health Resources and Practice Guide, specifically focusing on some individual level practice considerations and approaches. Next slide, Jackie.
Oh, that's right. I'm on slide patrol. I almost forgot it was going to, tune out there.
Thank you. So one important approach to consider in mental health practice that is FASD informed is reframing behavior. So what we mean by this is contextualizing people's behavior and actions in the context of their unique brain-based differences that Jackie was just speaking to. as well as people's different strengths and difficulties. So reframing challenging behavior can be an important part of adapting one's practice to the unique needs of each person with FASD, as well as decreasing any potential judgment or misattribution of behavior that might be challenging for mental health professionals to deal with, or make them feel frustrated, or potentially like therapy isn't potentially working for that individual. So mental health professionals may initially perceive difficulties that a client's experiencing or a lack of change as intentional, or a lack of motivation, or a lack of effort, instead of seeing the needs there that require support and flexibility in approach. So reframing some challenging behavior allows us to assess the needs, strengths, and strategies to better support someone based on their own unique set of skills. So for example, someone with FASD may have a particular challenge with organization and time management, and therefore may often be late to sessions that you have scheduled. Initially, this may cause some frustration or annoyance in mental health professionals. And we want to learn to reframe this behavior from an FASD-informed lens, where we can consider the challenges that may be leading to someone demonstrating this behavior, being late to sessions. So avoiding the judgment on it and really trying to reframe it and recognize that these actions aren't meaning necessarily a lack of interest or that they're not taking it seriously, but it's a result of their unique brain-based differences. So in the guide, we've outlined potential behaviors or actions that one might see as a mental health professional when supporting people with FASD, and offer potential reasons why this might be the case, as well as potentially appropriate responses that come from an FASD-informed lens. So it covers behaviors organized in the following areas. We have executive functioning, language, memory and attention, emotional response, as well as adaptive functioning. So if we go to the next slide, I'm going to go through one more example that we see in the guide. So this one's for executive functioning. So as I mentioned in my other example, the not showing up to appointments or being late. So you might be seeing this because of difficulties with memory or organization or time management. And some potentially responses that might be appropriate are helping with time management. So this might be creating a visual schedule with the client, setting up reminders and prompts around session times. Something else you might see is an inability to develop goals independently. This also depends on the specific therapist's approach. This might be how traditionally goals of therapy are done, but this may be difficult for someone with FASD or who has challenges with planning or problem solving. So adjusting this expectation for therapy and collaboratively developing concrete and realistic goals for each unique client may be an appropriate response in this case. Another example is fidgeting or staring out the window, or things that we might attribute to not paying attention or not taking the session seriously. But this, from an FASD-informed lens, this may just be challenges with sustained attention, self-monitoring, or task initiation. So again, potential responses might be regularly checking in, scheduling breaks throughout a session. You know, if your sessions are 30 minutes, that might not seem like a long time, but it may be for somebody who has difficulty with sustained attention. So scheduling in breaks might be helpful. Breaking up larger tasks into smaller chunks to tackle, changing the structure of sessions, and including movement breaks might be potentially appropriate responses. There are tons more examples in the guide, so this is just a hook to get you in to go learn more. So now I'm going to shift a bit to another response, another individual level approach in mental health care, which is having a strengths-based approach. So traditionally speaking, a lot of mental health care and support has often focused on deficits and deficiencies and difficulties, as Jackie mentioned. And more recently, there's been this shift to emphasize people's strengths and abilities and really focus on how we can implement a strengths-based approach to foster well-being. So the paper you see here is a wonderful contribution to this literature that's meant to balance the often negative and deficit-based literature that's on FASD. So I think the paper will be available in the chat. So if you're interested in that, you're welcome to check it out. In the context of mental health counseling and support, it's important to both identify people's unique strengths, as well as leverage this in counseling and therapy and mental health support settings to support people's wellness and happiness. So here we have a list of strengths that have been found for people with FASD and the ways in which they can be useful in mental health support. So for example, we have strong self-awareness. So this is a humongously important strength in the context of therapy. It can help with supporting self-advocacy, building self-awareness, being able to improve coping skills. Another, capacity for human connection. I'm pointing this one out as it will come into play a bit later in our presentation, but creating that connection with other people is not just important in terms of bolstering wellness, but also in terms of developing a relationship with your client. It is resilient and fulfillment. And as Jackie mentioned, there's this balance with vulnerabilities. You know, it's helpful in terms of responding to challenging life circumstances. Hope for the future, that is also a humongous strength in the context of mental health therapy, can help in terms of setting appropriate and meaningful goals for individuals, as well as improve self-determination and agency, which hasn't always been the case in disability areas where a lot of paternalism and difficulties in that area come up. So again, this is just a taste of some different things available in the guide. So a few more individual level practices that may be helpful when working with people with FASD. One is engaging in reflection. So this is actually speaking as the mental health professional or support worker. So thinking about your process with clients. So considering behaviors through an FASD lens, like we talked about in terms of reframing behavior, reflecting on your approaches that you're using with clients, considering and adjusting your own personal expectations of what the therapy should look like, acknowledging the self-efficacy of clients. All of these things are really important in order to effectively and appropriately work with people with FASD. We're also going to touch on this a bit later around implicit bias. So we'll touch on that when we talk about societal level factors. Adjusting language and communication. This can also be incredibly important, especially for people who may have difficulty with abstract concepts. So recognizing when clients may have brain-based difficulties in this area and adjusting and being flexible in your approach can be helpful. So this might be adapting activities that are largely language-based to be more concrete. Implementing visual descriptions versus just speaking might be helpful, or creating visual calendars, as I mentioned previously. So it's important to always check in with clients and make sure to minimize misunderstandings and see what works best for them. And on that, it's using multiple approaches. So being flexible in terms of the different approaches you're going to use. So often in mental health support, we rely a lot on verbal communication, but there are a lot of other ways that we can potentially connect with clients, including hands-on methods like drawing and music, and just changing up potentially what maybe a typical therapy session might look like and considering alternatives. And then finally, it's also important to consider consistency and structure when working with people with FASD. So this includes considering the physical environment, keeping a set schedule, and being consistent in your availability to that client and making sure they're not constantly being sent to different therapists, because that can really get in the way of appropriate services being given. Okay, next slide. So in the following, again, just a highlight of some really great research in this area. This paper discusses some of the common ingredients that are important when working with people with FASD. There is very limited research in terms of like therapeutic modalities that are more appropriate for people with FASD, but there are a lot of common ingredients that have been shown to be important when working with people with FASD. So again, this is just a really great paper that if you're interested, I believe the link's in the chat. And I'll pass it back to Jackie now to give us some context for relational factors.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Emma. You know, as I listened to you talk and I was reflecting a little bit as a clinician on, you know, a couple of things really struck me. And one of them is that at no point are you saying that support, counseling, therapy, or any of these other things that we might do for anyone are not going to work, or are no starters, right? And I think that's a really important message, that this isn't a question of if our support can work. This is a question of how. How do we come to the table? How do we adapt? And I feel like you provide us some tools, but you also validate the process of adaptation and reflection, so that we're not enabling, we're actually adapting and supporting to find out how this can work. And I find that very empowering as a clinician to start thinking, oh, this is a resource that can really shore up my approach to adapting practice and response for my clients. So yeah, thank you. Anyway, I can't help it. I just meander all the time. I have a script. I got to focus. I can't stay on it. How could we help me? No. I'm just going to shift us now into the relational side. So we've talked a little bit, and we've had some sound bites around some of the individual supports. And now we want to step a little bit bigger and think about relational. And as Emma said, one of the strengths that we often identify and speak about when we talk about folks with FASD is this capacity for connection. And this just powerful ability to build these deeply meaningful relationships, and to be really heartfelt in that connection. And like a lot of things that we're talking about today, that is two-sided coin. And that means that capacity can sometimes create a susceptibility, and a susceptibility can go both ways. It's an opportunity, and it can also be a risk. And so for our individuals with FASD, we know there's an overrepresentation of adversity. Individuals with FASD are more likely to have grown up experiencing some kind of traumatic or destabilizing events, because, again, we've talked about some of the brain-based differences already, but within their context and their environment, we have a brain that processes differently, that's a little bit extra sensitive. Capacity for connection is a strength, and yet we sometimes create environments, or they find themselves in environments that are not as supported and safe as they need to be. And so there's some risk associated with that, and that's something we need to be really aware of, particularly as it aligns with that susceptibility. These environments are going to be particularly hard. There's a lot of soapboxes I like to go off in terms of what we're doing, even within systems of support, to stabilize and invest in long-standing relationships for folks with FASD. Because when we do, here comes the flip side of the coin. We know that intervention that's built on relational systems of support, where we fuel and feed into that system of support, where we support caregivers, where we go in and we look at mentoring approaches, to intervention, all these spaces, that capacity for connection, we're working on the other side, and we're actually leveraging that strength, meeting individuals where they're at, and bolstering their skills within a relational context. So that very thing that can make us more susceptible, that connection, researchers are consistently finding that that's also a space where we can really leverage strength and create a space for growth and wellness. Over to you.
Thank you. So now again, we're going to turn over to some content from the toolkit, specifically focusing on more relational level practices and considerations. Next slide, please, Jackie. So as mentioned, relationships are vital, and building a strong therapeutic alliance in mental health support is actually been found to be one of the most important factors for successful and effective and appropriate psychotherapy and mental health support. So the therapeutic alliance speaks to a purposeful and collaborative relationship that creates trust and the development of a safe working environment and relationship. So as mentioned previously, it's been noted that people with FASD have incredible relational strengths that can be leveraged to actually develop this relationship and to create an environment where wellness can take center stage. An important consideration in developing this relationship are boundaries. It's important when you're developing this relationship to consider what appropriate boundaries are. respecting client boundaries, and making sure we're walking through these expectations several times, not just in our first intake appointment with individuals, but consistently checking in on that relationship and how it's forming and the boundaries that are being created. Especially for people with FASD who may struggle with memory, it's important to continue to revisit those established boundaries. In saying all this, we also want to acknowledge that there are often a lot of systemic and organizational barriers that can come to interfere with the ability for people to develop this strong relationship. So for example, the number of sessions that your organization allows you to have with individuals might be a barrier. But we want to consider just how important engaging with someone with FASD is, and can inform how they feel about therapy, like moving forward as well. If that relationship was not positive, that may also impact our ability to seek help and support moving forward. So it is important to recognize just how key that can be, not just for your own interactions in that moment, but also for someone's kind of wellness journey and therapy journey. So it's important to consider ways you might mitigate potential barriers that you see, as well as considering the needs of each person. So for example, in time constraints, it can be challenging to sit in the moment and really listen to someone's story without potentially jumping to solutions and interventions, which we want to do because we want to help. But sometimes that can really actually damage the relationship. And that's a really important part of healing in and of itself. So I wanted to share this quote from an individual with FASD that speaks to the importance of this relationship and really being actively present and listening. It says, "I don't want advice. I want them to listen. Every time I tell counselors what happened to me, they cut me off and want to give advice. They haven't even listened to what I need to say, and already they have an answer. It is not the story I want them to hear. I want them to know how frightened I am, how out of control I feel, and the fear that this experience will happen again. They want to fix me. They can't fix me. They have to teach me how to live with my history so I can move forward without always panicking every time something reminds me of the trauma I had before." So really making it clear that we need to be validating people's experiences. We need to be sitting in what people are sharing and really taking the time to build that relationship before jumping to our expertise, to our advice, to our interventions. We really need to sit in the relationship building. Something else that we included in the guide is information that we heard from caregivers around some of the things that they wanted mental health professionals to know and what was important to them. So one is recognizing if you're not a good fit. So this can be uncomfortable, but it's important to recognize when we might not be the best person to support someone, if either due to our limitations in knowledge or capabilities, or just not a good fit with someone's unique personality. So being able to admit this and help someone transition to somebody else, and making that as consistent and structured as possible would be an important step in this situation. Again, listening, which I think that quote does a wonderful job at emphasizing, really honoring what clients are saying to us, and evaluating our own listening skills. It's something we continue to develop throughout our lives. It's not just something we have or we don't. Validating people's experiences, so really honoring and understanding what people are saying and not putting our own judgments, and committing to the person. It can come with a lot of frustration and difficulty, especially if we haven't worked with people with FASD previously. There's a lot of knowledge to get. There's a lot of different adapting and flexibility that's needed. And so there is a need to kind of commit and really be willing to put in the time to do this work well. Anything to add, Jackie? I'll pass it back to you.
No, awesome. I still kind of have goosebumps from the quote, to be honest. It really strikes me. And I'm struck by, these are good practices. What you're describing are really good practices. The therapeutic practices are human being practices, and reminding ourselves that doesn't change when we're working with somebody with FASD too, right? I feel like sometimes it might be easy to say, oh, this person has a cognitive difference, so I'm going to jump in and do for them, as opposed to what I might do with anybody else. And so I do think that it's easy to kind of jump in, almost like you said, like a paternalistic strategy, when in fact that's that's not the. So I find myself again. See, now I'm reflecting. So I, don't know where else is, but I'm having like a moment over here in my space as I try to keep moving. So I'm going to rein it in and jump to our last level, which is, to speak a little bit to societal. So we're going to step out one more level and highlight the fact that supporting mental health and wellness is not only about understanding the individual, not only about really working within these relational contexts in meaningful ways, but also has something bigger in it. We hold a bigger space, and this relates to FASD in general, and it has very specific implications for mental health and wellness. Stigma is something we hear a lot about, and we write about and talk about increasingly more when we think about FASD and what it means to have FASD. Some of you may have heard it. I've certainly heard from a number of clients that, "Ooh, I don't want anyone to know I have FASD," and so this creates some challenges in how some people are perceived and understood. Creates challenges. How systems of support are thinking about individuals with FASD and saying, oh, they're too complex, we can't provide that service. Whoa, no. These are folks that can respond beautifully and well within our services when we first understand the individual and then build that meaningful relational context where we're asking how, and we're listening, and we're engaged. And so I think we're really called to action at a societal level, and Emma will give it to us and give us some pieces as to what that action is. And I think that, some of our researchers and Kelly, I think, is around here somewhere, has done some really great work saying, as a society, this isn't actually just a fun thing to do. This is about human rights. And this is about recognizing that folks with FASD have a right to access the services and supports that will equip them for success in their lives, and including a good quality of life and mental health and wellness. They have the right to this. And so we don't get to say, well, maybe kind of. No, I think we all need to think about what's our role and our job coming to the mat and being accountable to this, and how do we do that? And so then I say, Emma, how do we do that?
Yes, and this could be an entire presentation. So a little snippet of some important systemic level considerations. So today we're going to talk about addressing our biases. So as Jackie mentioned, an important system level consideration is the impact of stigma for people with FASD. And as mental health professionals, it's important to understand how these stereotypes, stigma, and misconceptions have influenced our own understanding of FASD, and therefore the implicit biases we may hold. So implicit biases are unconscious attitudes, ideas, or stereotypes that we often unconsciously hold about people that can influence our thinking, our behaviors, and our actions. So as Jackie actually mentioned, picked up on this, but some potential examples of implicit biases we may hold include the idea that FASD only affects people of certain races or socioeconomic backgrounds, the idea that FASD is 100% preventable, or the idea that people with FASD cannot participate in counseling due to their brain-based differences, or they're too complex to benefit from traditional therapeutic approaches. So these ideas can come from the media, from personal experiences, from learned norms and values, from misconceptions, and a lack of information. So we may hold these ideas without actually even recognizing it, but it's our job to identify them and to work on challenging our own thinking. So there are a lot of different ways that we can begin to address our biases once we've identified them. So here are a few examples. So thinking critically about the content and information that we consume. So not just blanketly accepting information that we hear or ideas we see on social media or someone's opinions, anything like that, like really critically evaluating where information is coming from. As well as that also to me speaks to listening to people with FASD. That's where most of our information should be coming from, or with research that involves people with FASD in a meaningful way. Consider the language that you use to support your own shifts in understanding. So changing our own language can actually have a really big impact on then how our thinking is. So trying to recognize potentially language we use that is stigmatizing can be really important here in shifting our own ways of thinking. Learning about other ways of conceptualizing disability. So for example, the social view of disability, which looks more at not individual level people having challenges, but more that society actually creates barriers for people to meaningfully participate. So these different shifts that we can make can just help us to kind of expand our understanding and be more wary of when we hear things that may be stigmatizing. Take time to think and reflect on your own social location. So the ways in which your own history, your own identity, I'm a white settler, I have a lot of privilege, and with that comes a need for a lot of self-reflection and recognizing how that has impacted my understanding of the world, my perceptions, and then ultimately how I'm going to interact with people, the types of interventions I might decide to choose, the ways in which I'm going to interact with clients. So really digging deep into how our own social location impacts that relationship, and even so far as to like the actions that we take with clients. And then getting very comfortable with how uncomfortable this can be. It's not easy work. It's very important, and a lot of people can get very uncomfortable with it, and that's a valid feeling, but we need to move beyond it and just accept that it will be there while we work through this really important work. Working with other people and having these difficult conversations with mentors or colleagues can be an important way to kind of move through this discomfort relationally. So, Jackie, anything to add to that? Oh, sorry, I added this slide without telling you. This was just my plug to say there is a lot more information available. I have only touched on a very surface level of the information available to you in the guide, so I highly suggest you check it out if you're interested. Now, Jackie, do you have anything else to add?
Well, that's okay. You gave me a moment because A, I couldn't find my mute, and B, I was busy reflecting and feeling slightly uncomfortable about it. So, yeah. You know, I actually had a day the other day when I was in a class teaching, and I went off on a shocking Jackie soapbox, which never ever happens. But anyway, and I was blah, blah, and then somebody raised this question to me, and it was one of those moments where I just stopped me in my tracks, and I'm like, oh, I hadn't thought about that. So here I am in front of this large group of people going, oh, I hadn't thought about that. It was a very public, deeply reflective moment that, you know, I don't know what color of red I turned, but it was great because, you know, when you think out loud sometimes and create some space for us to be a little vulnerable, sometimes I have no idea how much I don't know until I spin it and somebody's kind enough to help me out of whatever I just stepped into. You know, I try to be aware, but sometimes that's what I have to listen to too. And it's not always an easy lesson to learn. So thank you. Growth can be painful sometimes. It really can. As we wrap up today, I just want to bring it back to say that, you know, it's been a tip of an iceberg kind of, you know, walk through some of the ideas we have in terms of how to integrate our thinking. And I think that what we're hoping, Em and I, as we talked about this, is that you would walk away from this presentation not saying, oh, I've got it all figured out, but rather, oh, I have so many questions now. I gotta, you know, do some things. Because I think questions are a really good space for us to be in when we're saying how, and questions where you feel like, oh, I'm going to go look at this guide because I need to understand that. We also wanted to offer that we don't see the guide as standing alone. When we talk about intervention, we always talk about intervention that is integrated, that flows together. We recognize there's never one piece. We really hoped, and I think Emma's, you know, motivation in pulling this guide together and working, she worked with a big advisory group. She sought so much information, as you probably got that idea. Was to say we want to operationalize and create some more actual nuggets for folks to start working with as we get more information and more research and more knowledge about what mental health practices can look like with folks with FASD. So it's hope that you can take this nugget and this piece and then plug it into this bigger integrated system of support, recognizing it's one piece, but it's a really important piece that maybe we can action. And as we talk about the bigger sort of societal pieces, and we acknowledge the fact that this has to exist within a system of support, and even at times Emma's like, wow, you know, when we're looking at session length or session times, or what we're going to do with no-show policies and all of these things, where sometimes we're talking to program managers and we're talking to organizations, and we're sort of running up against these systems that create rules and spaces that just don't work. And that comes back to those societal elements, and we have a responsibility as a society to change the rules that disadvantage our populations who really are deserving of and need these supports. So like, we need to push back and challenge that, and so we've produced additional materials, and here's a couple of things that we can offer up and show you, and these are not, you know, end all be all answers, but rather an acknowledgement of the fact that as we incorporate the toolkit and we start thinking about what actions are there, we increasingly want to document and have in black and white the kinds of things that say we actually not only need to change what I'm doing as a clinician, but the system I work in also has to make some changes. And advocating for these changes is sometimes made easier when I can bring with me a document and say, read here, I'm not making this up. I'm not just trying to, you know, make it not work for us. We need to find models that do things a little bit differently. And there are these resources that we can plug the toolkit into. And, you know, together it allows us to think about, you know, how we do better jobs of early identification, creating shared understanding, making sure there's access to timely and well-suited supports, and then reducing stigma. When we can pull these pieces together from a system level all the way down to the individual practice I'm providing, then we start to see that beautifully integrated system of supports rolling together. So we advanced some of this, hoping we've stoked up some curiosity and really got you thinking, hoping that you're what would Emma say, thirsty for more, and want to take a look, but also recognizing that it has to sit in a context, and there'll be times when you're going to feel tension between what you know needs to happen and what is allowable, and how we navigate those systems. And so we hopefully can point you towards, you know, those documents that help navigate the systems. At the end of the day, we want to highlight the mental health is a complex construct. We can think about it in lots of different ways. We advance the idea of thinking about wellness promotion, not just illness mitigation. We want to change the story. We think folks with FASD deserve a quality of life and an experience of wellness. That's our goal. That's our goal. And in doing that, we think we can address mental health needs proactively and in acute situations through treatment and intervention. We can shift understandings. We really think that that's a possibility. We think that when we reframe, when we educate and train folks, when we communicate, it changes our story into how we do things, not if we can or should we and whatever. It's how we change the storyline. And then we can create new goals. And Emma talked lots about goals that are well suited, that are unbiased, not my goals, not my way, but what are the goals that are appropriate and well suited to this individual, who can then work towards that quality of life, which means attainment of those goals that are theirs, personalized and not socially constructed or externally determined. So let's shift this storyline and let's create these trajectories towards healthy outcomes, wellness, and even that happiness that the World Health Organization said, hey, let's head for this. Emma, any last words as we about to shift to some questions in our last few minutes here?
I think that was a great way to end it off. And thank you all so much for listening. And I hope you check out the resource. And if anyone has any questions, I look forward to answering them.
And you see our emails there too. We have a few minutes for questions, but in addition to the CanFASD link and the mental health link, which will be provided in your chat, you see also that both Emma and I have provided our emails and are happy to hear questions and happy to connect further, because we just finished saying a lot about how important connection is. And it's something we like to practice a little bit, the things that we advance.
So thank you very much for the presentation. It was an excellent presentation and gave me a lot of things to think about as well. So just to tie it up, there aren't any other questions. So a huge thanks to both of you. If anybody missed any of the first part of this webinar, it's on the CanFASD YouTube channel. And I still want to put in a plug too on sensory processing. There is a 3-part webinar on sensory processing for people with FASD on the CanFASD YouTube channel as well. I'd like to thank all of you for joining today and hope that you'll join us for other webinars. To get more information on CanFASD and to stay in the know with respect to all upcoming webinars, please check out our website at www.canfasd.ca or follow us on the social media channels to find out our resources. So again, hats off to you, Jackie and Emma, for tackling a very broad and important area and doing it so well. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.